After graduating, I quietly placed my grandparents' $3 million estate into a trust, just to be sure. My name is Aurora Lane. I'm 26. I'm an environmental lawyer. And I'm the granddaughter who learned silence is strategy. They showed up at my door last Sunday, smiling too wide. Mom with her signature lemon cookies, Dad with his fake charm. My sister Danielle, dressed like she was about to negotiate a stock merger. We just wanted to talk about Grandma and Grandpa's estate, Dad said. His voice dipped in syrup. They hadn't called me once in over a year, but I knew exactly why they were here. They thought I was still the quiet, obedient daughter who'd nod and sign anything they put in front of me. They didn't know the papers were already signed, just not the ones they wanted. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe. Drop a comment, where are you watching from? The knock on my apartment door was soft at first, then firm. I was stirring my coffee, looking out at the city waking up. Sunday mornings used to be quiet for me, a time to reset. Not anymore. I already knew who it was. My stomach tightened. It always did when they were near. I opened the door, and there they were. A perfect picture, almost too perfect. Mom, her blonde hair perfectly styled, holding a basket with a white cloth over it. I could smell the lemons even before she spoke. Her cookies, her peace offering, or more accurately, her distraction. Aurora, honey. We were just in the neighborhood, she chirped. Her smile stretched a little too wide. Her eyes, though, were already scanning my small living room, probably judging. She always judged. Dad was right behind her, a hand on her back, his usual charming smile plastered on his face. It was the smile he used on clients, on new neighbors, on anyone he wanted something from. It never reached his eyes. Thought we'd drop by. Haven't seen you in ages. Ages. Over a year. Not one call, not one text asking how I was, how my new job was, if I was even alive. But now, suddenly, they were in the neighborhood, my neighborhood, which was a good 45 minutes out of their way. And then there was Danielle, my older sister, always impeccably dressed, even for a casual Sunday visit. Today, it was a crisp white blazer and tailored pants. She looked like she was heading to a board meeting, not her little sister's apartment. Her expression was sharper, less fake than Mom and Dad's. She didn't bother with the niceties. Her eyes went straight to mine, a calculating glint already there. Mind if we come in? Dad asked, stepping forward slightly, already pushing the door open a bit wider. I stepped back, letting them in. The familiar scent of their expensive perfume and cologne filled my small space, making it feel even smaller. Mom immediately went to my tiny kitchen counter, setting down her cookie basket. I brought your favorite, sweetie. My favorite. She hadn't made them for me in years. She made them for people she wanted to impress. Or manipulate. They all settled onto my couch, which was really only meant for 2 people. It felt cramped. Like them, taking up all the space. I remained standing. It felt safer. So, Dad began, adjusting his tie, even though he wasn't wearing one. It was a habit, a nervous tick. We just wanted to talk about Grandma and Grandpa's estate. His voice was smooth like syrup, as the outline said, but it was thin too, transparent. Danielle nodded, a slight knowing smirk on her face, as if this was a plan they had all rehearsed. And I was the unsuspecting audience. It's been, 2 years now? Mom added, feigning a sigh, a sad expression quickly replacing her wide smile. Such a difficult time. We've all been through so much. My eyes narrowed just a fraction. We had all been through so much? They hadn't been through anything except the inconvenience of losing an inheritance they felt entitled to. I was the one who had actually lost something. People. My grandparents. The 2 people who loved me unconditionally. I looked at them. Really looked. They sat there, a united front of avarice and entitlement. They truly thought I was still the same Aurora, the quiet girl who always kept her head down, the one who never spoke up, the one who would just do what she was told. They thought I was still the quiet, obedient daughter who'd nod and sign anything they put in front of me. They didn't know the papers were already signed, just not the ones they wanted. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and thick. I took a slow breath, letting it out quietly. They were waiting for me to say something, to ask what papers, to act confused. But I wasn't confused. Not anymore. Okay, I said, my voice calm, even to my own ears. What about it? Their faces shifted subtly. Surprise, then a hint of annoyance. They expected me to be more eager, more pliable. Dad cleared his throat. Well, you see, sweetheart, with your name still involved in some of the paperwork, it's just making things a little complicated. Complicated how? I asked, keeping my gaze steady on his. I didn't blink. Danielle leaned forward, cutting in. Look, Aurora, we know you loved Grandma and Grandpa. We all did, but this has dragged on long enough. Mom and Dad need to get access to their inheritance. It's what's rightfully theirs, my inheritance. They never once thought of it as my inheritance, even though my name was, as Dad said, involved. Mom finally spoke again, her voice a little softer, more persuasive. Your father and I just want to finalize everything. It's a lot of responsibility, honey. For you, I mean. With the estate still technically in limbo, it's a burden. We just want to take that burden off your shoulders. A burden. That's what they called my grandparents' legacy. A burden. I felt a coldness spread through me. It wasn't anger yet. It was something deeper. A resolve. I knew exactly what they wanted. They wanted me to sign away any lingering claim I might have. To make it easy for them. To make me disappear from the equation. They had no idea. I walked over to the small bookshelf by the wall, pulling out a thick, leather-bound journal. It was Grandpa's. I'd been reading through his old entries, his thoughts on the ocean, on life. It always brought me peace. Now holding it, I felt a different kind of strength. I turned back to them. Their smiles were fading now, replaced by impatience. So, I said, my voice still even, "You're here because you want me to sign something?" Dad nodded quickly, too quickly. Yes, exactly. Just some final papers. Standard procedure. He even pulled a manila envelope from under his arm. Always prepared, always ready for the easy path. I just looked at the envelope. I didn't need to see what was inside. I already knew. They truly believed I was still the girl they could walk all over. The girl who was too soft, too emotional, too naive to understand their schemes. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Not since their true colors had shown themselves. Not since my grandparents had left me with a final, quiet task. I took another breath. The lemon cookies sat untouched on the counter. The scent, once comforting, now felt like a lie. It's already done, I said, my voice clear and steady. The words hung in the air, dropping like small stones. Mom's smile flickered. Dad's brow furrowed. Danielle's smirk vanished completely. What's done, Aurora? Danielle asked, her tone sharp, suspicious. I just offered them a small, tight smile, the kind that didn't reach my eyes, the kind that said, you have no idea. The papers? I said. They're already signed and finalized. Their faces went blank for a moment, trying to process, trying to catch up. They expected me to be a step behind. I was already 10 steps ahead. Then the confusion started to set in. A tiny crack in their confident facade. But we haven't presented anything for you to sign yet, Dad stammered, his fake charm finally cracking. No, I agreed. You haven't, but I have. I watched their expressions. The slow dawning realization that something was very wrong, that their plan, whatever it was, had already been derailed. By me, the quiet one. The invisible one. This was just the beginning. They didn't know the half of it. They didn't know the quiet war I had been waging. A war for my grandparents' memory, for their legacy, and for myself. This visit, the one they didn't see coming, was just the prelude. The real story, the one where they learned just how much I had changed, was about to unfold. 2 years ago, the world shifted on its axis for me. My grandparents, the anchors of my life, passed away within months of each other. First Grandma, then Grandpa. It was like a light went out. Their coastal estate, nestled by the wild Oregon Sea, felt empty, too quiet. It was worth around $3 million, but to me, it was priceless. It was where my childhood lived. It was where I felt truly loved. Their will was simple. It was clear. Divide everything equally among their children, my parents and my Aunt Carol. Except my parents weren't grieving. Not in the way I was. Not in the way a child grieves for their parents. They were calculating. I saw it from day one. I remember standing at Grandma's funeral, a blur of black clothes and hushed voices. My eyes were stinging with unshed tears. I felt raw, and then I heard it. A whisper just behind me. It was Mom. That old house could really use some upgrades. A modern kitchen, maybe an infinity pool overlooking the ocean. It would fetch a fortune. She wasn't whispering to herself. She was whispering to Dad, and he was nodding, a thoughtful, almost hungry look on his face. This was before Grandma was even in the ground, before the funeral flowers even had a chance to wilt. It shocked me to my core. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt disrespectful. It felt cold. They were talking renovations, buyers, and profit. Not about Grandma, not about the memories, just money. A few weeks later, at Grandpa's memorial, it was the same, maybe worse. They were already openly discussing selling, like a business deal, like they were real estate agents, not grieving children. The market's good right now, Dad said, nursing a drink, a grim smile on his face. We could probably get a decent offer quickly. Aunt Carol seems to think we should hold on to it for a bit, Mom said, her voice laced with impatience. But she's always been so sentimental. She rolled her eyes slightly. I stood there, listening to them, feeling a deep ache in my chest that had nothing to do with grief. It was betrayal, a sickening feeling that started in my gut and spread. They were stripping away the sanctity of everything. They'd already forgotten who actually took care of my grandparents in their final years. It was me, Aurora. It wasn't Mom, who drove them to their doctor's appointments twice a week, even when it meant a 3-hour round trip from my college town. It wasn't Dad, who sat for hours, patiently listening to Grandpa tell the same fishing stories again and again, pretending it was the first time. It wasn't Danielle, who made sure Grandma had her specific bland diet meals, or who helped her shower when her arthritis flared up. It was me. I was the one who drove them. I was the one who cooked for them, making sure they ate well. I was the one who handled their taxes, their bills, their endless paperwork. I learned how to do it all. They trusted me. They trusted me because my parents were too busy with their careers, too busy with their social lives, too busy to care for the people who had given them everything. I practically lived at that estate during my last 2 years of college, driving back and forth, balancing my studies with their needs. My grandparents were getting older, frailer. They needed more help, and my parents were nowhere to be found. Aurora's so good with them, Mom used to say to her friends, a proud smile on her face. Such a caring granddaughter. But it wasn't out of a pure heart. It was because I was useful. I was a tool, a free caregiver, a means to an end. I remember a conversation with Grandma just a few months before she passed. We were sitting on the porch watching the waves crash. Your parents, they have their own lives, she said softly, patting my hand. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were sharp. But you, my dear, you have a good heart. You truly see us, I think she knew. Even then, she knew the difference between true love and obligation. My parents saw me as the dutiful granddaughter, easy to manipulate. They saw my kindness as a weakness, something they could exploit. They never truly saw me as a person with my own feelings, my own struggles, my own heart. I was just the one who could be counted on, the one who would do the dirty work. And now, with my grandparents gone, their usefulness for me was over. Or so they thought. The estate, their home, their sanctuary, was just a financial asset to my parents. A number on a balance sheet. A potential profit. Nothing more. This was the beginning of the betrayal. It wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was a slow, creeping realization. A cold, hard truth that settled deep in my bones. My parents, my own family, saw me as nothing more than a convenient accessory, a means to their own selfish ends, and they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The official paperwork for the estate arrived a few weeks after Grandpa's passing. It was a thick envelope, official-looking, filled with legal terms and forms. My parents called me over to their house, not to comfort me, not to share memories, to get me to sign. Mom laid the stack of papers on their polished dining table. It was already set up, a pen waiting next to a highlighted section. She called it a formality. Just sign where I tell you, honey, she said, her voice sweet, almost sickly so. She pointed to a line. You're good with documents, remember? All that lawyer stuff you study, I nodded. I smiled, a small, polite smile that didn't reach my eyes. I pretended to be naive. I pretended I didn't know what these papers really meant. I pretended I didn't see the eager gleam in their eyes. I signed. My signature, a loop of my name, seemed so small on the page, but that small signature they believed was their ticket, their golden key. For months after that, the conversations around me, whenever my parents deigned to include me in a family gathering, were all about our family's big future. With the estate, we can finally, Dad would start, then trail off, looking at Mom, who would nod conspiratorially. We're thinking of expanding the business, Mom would add. Maybe a new vacation home. Never once did they say, Aurora, what do you think? Never once did they ask what my grandparents' wishes might have been, beyond the bare words of the will. They simply assumed it was all theirs. Assumed I was just a quiet fixture, present but not participating in their grand plans. They talked about our family's big future, not realizing they'd never included me in it. Not truly. I was just a ghost in the background, a silent listener. One night I was staying at their house for a rare weekend visit. I had gone to bed but couldn't sleep. I got up for a glass of water and heard their voices, low and murmuring from the kitchen. I paused at the top of the stairs. It wasn't intentional eavesdropping. It was just, I couldn't help but hear. She's so easily managed. Mom's voice floated up, light and dismissive. Aurora's the kind of girl who'll never question us. She'll do exactly what we tell her. Always has. Then Dad's voice, a chuckle. That degree was a good investment then. Keeps her busy, keeps her quiet. And she owes us for her education anyway. My blood ran cold. I stood frozen on the stairs, the words piercing through me like tiny, sharp needles. She owes us for her education. The irony of it all hit me like a physical blow, a wave of nausea, a burning sensation behind my eyes. They really thought they had paid for my education. They really believed I owed them. My grandparents, my grandma and grandpa, bless their hearts, were the ones who paid for every single cent of my degree. From undergraduate all the way through law school. They set up a college fund for me when I was born. They always wanted me to have the best. They believed in me. My parents contributed nothing, not a dime. They never even asked about my student loans because they assumed I had none, because they assumed they were the ones who took care of everything. That night, I didn't go back to bed. I sat in the darkness of the guest room, staring at the ceiling, feeling an emptiness open up inside me. It wasn't just neglect. It was deliberate ignorance, a willful blindness to my existence, to my efforts, to the truth of my life. I was the invisible grandchild, the one who did all the work, but got none of the recognition, the one who was loved by my grandparents but used by my parents. My presence was tolerated, even encouraged as long as it served their needs. My emotions, my well-being, my own future, they were never a consideration. This wasn't just about money. It was about being seen. And I wasn't. Not by them. Not really. I was just a function, a placeholder, a tool. The realization settled deep, a heavy stone in my heart. They didn't love me for who I was. They loved what I could do for them, or, more accurately, what I represented to them, a compliant path to more wealth. And that realization, that deep, painful truth, was the precise moment something inside me clicked. A shift, a hardening. I would still be quiet, but my quietness would no longer be a sign of weakness. It would become my greatest strength. It would become my strategy. They wanted to play a game. They had no idea I had already started playing, and I was playing to win. Not for myself, not for money, but for my grandparents, for their memory, for the legacy my parents were so carelessly about to destroy. The next morning, I packed my bag. I said my goodbyes, still with that same polite, unrevealing smile. They didn't notice the difference. They never did, but I knew. And from that day forward, everything changed. For me. And soon, for them too. I was done being invisible. I was done being a tool. After that night, the one where I overheard them, my world shrunk. Not in a bad way, in a focused way. I pulled back from my family even more than before. The calls became shorter, the visits rarer. I had an excuse, a good one. My new job as an environmental lawyer was demanding. But it also gave me a reason to create distance. While my parents schemed, convinced they had me wrapped around their finger, I spent my nights doing something else entirely. I wasn't just working cases for the firm. I was deep diving into trust law, inheritance codes, legal loopholes. I wasn't plotting revenge then. Not in the way they'd think. My goal wasn't to hurt them. My goal was to protect. To make sure their greed didn't erase my grandparents' legacy. That estate. It wasn't just a house. It was an old stone house by the Oregon coast. It had stood there for generations. It was where I'd spent every summer of my childhood. Every holiday. It was where Grandpa taught me to read the tides, to understand the rhythm of the ocean. He showed me how to mend fishing nets just like his father had shown him. Grandma taught me how to bake bread from scratch in her old cast-iron oven, the scent of yeast and warmth filling the kitchen. She taught me about native plants, about the birds that flocked to their garden. It was more than property. It was a living memory. It was their sanctuary, and I refused to let it become another cash grab for my parents. Another renovation project, another flip, another quick profit to fund their endless desire for more. So I studied. I learned. I acted quietly. I spent hours in my small apartment surrounded by legal texts. I pored over case studies, learning about charitable trusts, conservation easements, irrevocable foundations. My law degree, which my parents thought I owed them for, was now my shield. My weapon, I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Not my friends, not even Aunt Carol, who I knew was also quietly upset by my parents' behavior, because I knew deep down that the moment I spoke a word, my parents would find out, and they would stop at nothing to prevent me from doing anything. They would twist my words, accuse me, perhaps even try to take legal action against me. So, silence. It became my constant companion. It was lonely sometimes. Carrying this secret, knowing what I was planning, while they were oblivious. They would occasionally send me a text, something like, "Still waiting on the estate, Aurora. Any news?" And I would reply with a vague, professional-sounding response about legal processes or administrative delays. Each reply felt like a small act of defiance, a quiet victory. The house itself, the estate, was my sanctuary too. After Grandpa passed and before the legal limbo truly set in, I spent a lot of time there. Just me. I'd walk the beach, feel the cold spray of the Pacific, and talk to them, my grandparents. I won't let them ruin it, I'd whisper to the wind, my voice carried away by the roar of the waves. I promise. It wasn't just a promise to them. It was a promise to myself, to the little girl who had found refuge and love in that house, to the young woman who was tired of being overlooked and underestimated. Every night after a long day at work, I would eat a simple dinner, then sit down at my desk, opening up my textbooks and my laptop. The glow of the screen became my only light in the darkness. I read until my eyes blurred. I cross-referenced legal codes. I drafted documents, deleting and revising, making sure every word was perfect, every clause airtight. I learned that an irrevocable trust, particularly a charitable one, was the strongest form of protection. Once the assets were in it, they were out of reach, forever. And if I was the trustee, I could ensure it was managed exactly as my grandparents would have wanted, for the good of the community, for the protection of the environment. Their values, my values. The solitude became a kind of strength. It forced me to rely only on myself, to trust my own judgment, to build my own resolve. The quiet between the lines of those legal documents wasn't empty. It was filled with purpose. It was filled with my quiet determination. My parents, in their arrogance, thought my silence meant compliance. They thought my quiet nature meant I lacked the will to fight. They thought I was too soft, too emotional to understand the real world of money and assets. They saw a victim. They didn't see the lawyer. They didn't see the granddaughter who was ready to fight for her past. They just saw the tool, but tools can be sharpened. And I was sharpening myself, quietly, in the dark, preparing for the moment when I would finally put their schemes to an end. The moment when my quiet actions would speak louder than any of their words. The night before the will was set to be finalized by the state, I drove out to the estate. It was late. The moon was a sliver, hiding behind clouds, and the winding coastal road was dark, illuminated only by my headlights. The ocean's roar grew louder with every mile. I needed to be there. One last time, before the final decision. The house was cold and still when I let myself in. The air smelled faintly of dust and salt, the lingering scent of memories. I didn't turn on many lights, just the old lamp in the kitchen. Its soft glow spilled onto the worn wooden table, the same table where Grandma had taught me to roll pie crusts. I had brought the documents with me, my meticulously drafted trust deed, the legal forms, my notebook filled with notes and cross-references. I spread them out on the table, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 happy meals. Every signature space on those papers seemed to gleam under the lamplight. Each one felt like a test, a final choice. On one side, the easy path, let the will proceed as written. Let my parents and Aunt Carol inherit. Watch as my parents likely sold off everything, ripped out the character, and turned it into another soulless, modern vacation rental. And then I would truly lose it all. My grandparents' legacy, their values, their memory. On the other side, the difficult path, the one I had painstakingly researched and prepared for, the one that would inevitably cause a storm of anger and resentment from my parents, but the one that would honor my grandparents. I sat there for hours just staring at the papers. My hand hovered over the signature line for the charitable trust. My stomach churned with a mix of fear and resolve. This wasn't a game. This was real. This was final. I thought about Grandma and Grandpa. I pictured Grandpa, his weathered hands showing me how to tie a knot for a fishing lure, his deep voice explaining how the health of the ocean mattered more than any single catch. I remembered Grandma, her quiet strength, her love for the wild beauty of their garden, her firm belief that we had a responsibility to leave things better than we found them. Their values weren't about money. They were about stewardship, about giving back, about community. And my parents? Their values were about profit, about personal gain, about forgetting the past to get more in the present. The choice, when I truly faced it, became crystal clear. It wasn't about defying my parents. It was about honoring my grandparents. It was about protecting something sacred. That's when I made my decision. The midnight decision. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. I created the Lane Foundation. I named it after Grandpa's old fishing company. A small, humble business he built with his bare hands, not for riches, but for a good life, a fair wage, and respect for the sea. The foundation was a charitable trust. Its mission, dedicated to marine conservation and scholarships for rural students. Students just like me, who grew up near the coast, who understood the ocean, and who might not otherwise have the chance to pursue an education. It was everything my grandparents believed in, protecting the ocean that gave them so much, investing in young people from the community they loved. And then, with one deliberate, unhesitating signature, I moved the entire $3 million estate into it, legally, permanently. It was all laid out. All done, not under my name as an owner. I didn't want the money. I didn't want the burden of ownership. I just wanted to protect it, so I became the trustee, meaning no one, not even me, could sell it. Not for personal profit. It was locked away, dedicated to its charitable purpose. The foundation owned the house, the land, everything. I, as trustee, was simply the guardian, the steward. The weight lifted immediately. A vast, quiet sense of peace settled over me. It felt right. It felt true. I leaned back in the old wooden chair, looking around the quiet kitchen. The moon had finally peeked out from behind the clouds, casting a soft silver glow through the window, illuminating the rough-hewn beams. I imagined Grandma and Grandpa watching, a gentle smile on their faces. I had done it, quietly, secretly, but definitively. The storm was coming, I knew that. My parents would be furious. They would feel betrayed. They would lash out, but their anger would be about their lost profit, not about a lost legacy. And I was prepared for it, because for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Free from their expectations, free from their manipulations, and free to finally uphold the true wishes of the two people who had truly loved me. I packed up the signed documents, each page a testament to my resolve. The first light of dawn was just beginning to touch the horizon as I drove away from the estate. The ocean stretched out before me, vast and endless, just as my grandparents had always seen it. And now, thanks to a quiet midnight decision, it would be protected. Just like their memory, I had become my own person, and my quiet strength had finally found its voice. A voice in the form of action, not words. Action that would soon echo through my family's unsuspecting world. The weeks after I signed the foundation documents were strange. They were quiet, but it was a heavy, expectant quiet, like the air before a storm. I knew what my parents and sister were waiting for. They were waiting for a for sale sign to appear on the lawn of the coastal estate. They were waiting for calls from real estate agents. They were waiting for their payday. And every day that passed without one, the pressure started to build. I could feel it, even from miles away. The first call came from my mother, about a month after the will was finalized. Her voice was light, breezy, as if she were just calling to chat. "Aurora, honey, how are you? We haven't heard from you." "I'm fine, Mom. Just busy with work." It was the truth. My job was demanding, and now so was setting up the foundation's initial framework. "Oh, of course," she said. A beat of silence. Then, "I was just wondering, have you heard anything from the estate lawyers? About moving forward with the house?" "It's a process, Mom," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. "These things take time." Right. "Of course," she said, though a hint of impatience colored her tone. "Well, just keep us posted, sweetheart." She hung up, and I knew it was just the beginning. 2 more weeks passed. The next call was from my father. He didn't bother with the pleasantries. "Aurora, your mother and I are getting a little concerned. What's the holdup with the estate? We've got financial plans we need to put in motion." "There are some legal complexities, Dad," I replied, using the vague language that had become my shield. "It's being handled." "What does that mean, it's being handled?" He pressed, his voice losing its usual smooth edge. "Is there a problem? Do we need to get our own lawyer involved?" "Everything is proceeding according to the legal framework," I said. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the framework he was expecting. I could hear him sigh in frustration on the other end of the line. "This is ridiculous. It should be simple." The will was clear. "Yes," I said softly. It was. After that, the calls became more frequent, a rotating schedule of my family members. Mom would try to be sweet and cajoling. Dad would be demanding and businesslike. And then Danielle started calling. Danielle was different. She was sharp, and she thought she was smarter than everyone else. "Okay, Aurora, cut the crap," she said one evening, her voice sharp and devoid of any warmth. "What is going on?" I spoke to a real estate agent in the area, a friend of a friend. She said the property isn't listed and there's no record of it being prepared for sale. "What are you doing?" "I'm doing what's necessary, Danielle," I replied. "That's not an answer. Mom and Dad are starting to freak out. They think you've messed something up. Did you lose the paperwork? Did you miss a deadline? Just tell me what's wrong so I can fix it." The condescension in her voice was thick. "So I can fix it." She still saw me as the incompetent little sister who couldn't handle anything on her own. The irony was almost painful. "There's nothing to fix," I told her, my voice flat. "Everything is under control. That was the last time she called me for a while. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't expectant anymore. It was suspicious. They were talking amongst themselves, I knew it. They were trying to figure me out, trying to understand what was happening behind the scenes. They were moving from confusion to suspicion. The panic was just around the corner. The year that followed was one of the most peaceful of my life. I threw myself into my work and into the Lane Foundation. I found a small local board of directors, a retired marine biologist, a community accountant, and a high school principal, people who understood and shared my grandparents' values. We established the criteria for the scholarship. We partnered with a local university on a coastal erosion study. I spent weekends at the estate, not cleaning it out to sell, but restoring it. I weeded Grandma's garden until the native flowers bloomed again. I repaired the old wooden fence that overlooked the cliff. The house started to feel like a home again, not a prize to be won. It felt alive with purpose. Meanwhile, my family was living in a different reality. Theirs was a world of frustration and mounting anger. I found out later that they had hired their own lawyer to look into the delay. The lawyer, of course, hit a brick wall. The estate wasn't in probate anymore. The ownership had been transferred. But to whom? He couldn't get a clear answer, because private foundation records aren't as public as a simple property sale. Their confusion turned to panic when they tried to move forward with their plans anyway. My father had apparently pre-sold a business expansion based on his expected inheritance. Danielle had put a down payment on a luxury condo. They had spent money they didn't have, all based on the arrogant assumption that the $3 million was already theirs. The breaking point for them came when a developer they had been speaking with, someone they had promised a prime piece of coastal real estate, did his own research and came back to them. The Lane property? He had told my father, "Sorry, that's off the market. Permanently. It's owned by some kind of environmental foundation now." The ground had fallen out from under them. That's when they decided they had to see me, in person. They couldn't intimidate me over the phone. They couldn't get a straight answer. They believed that if they could just get in a room with me, the four of them against me, they could bully me, manipulate me, and force me to give them what they wanted. They thought that the quiet, obedient girl was still in there somewhere, just hiding behind a bit of stubbornness. They thought they could break me, so they planned their visit. They baked their cookies. They put on their best clothes and their most convincing smiles. They practiced their lines. They thought they were walking into an ambush they had set. They had no idea they were walking into mine, the one I had been quietly preparing for over a year. The silence was about to be broken, and their world was about to shatter. The air in my apartment was thick with the scent of lemons and false sincerity. They sat on my couch, a united front of entitlement, having delivered their opening lines. They wanted to talk. They wanted to move forward. They had a buyer. It was all so simple in their minds. All they needed was my signature, my compliance. I let the silence hang for a moment after my father mentioned the buyer. I watched them. Mom was fidgeting with the handle of the cookie basket. Dad was trying to look relaxed, but a muscle in his jaw was twitching. Danielle just stared at me, her eyes narrowed, trying to read me like a legal document, searching for a loophole. "You have a buyer?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "A very motivated one," Dad said, leaning forward, sensing a breakthrough. "A developer. He's offering top dollar. It's a fantastic opportunity for the family, Aurora. For all of us. For the family." The words were a bitter pill. They had never considered me part of the family, not when it truly mattered. Mom chimed in, her voice soft and pleading. "We know this is hard for you, honey, letting go of the house. But it's what's best. Since your name is still on some of the old paperwork as an executor, we just need you to sign off so we can finalize the sale and split the profits fairly." Fairly? I repeated the word, letting it echo in the small room. It sounded foreign coming from her lips. What did they know of fairness? I took a slow sip of my coffee, my movements deliberate. I set the mug down on the coaster on my coffee table, the ceramic making a soft, definitive click. Their eyes followed my every move. They were on edge, waiting for the final act of their play, the part where I caved. Then I reached for the simple manila folder that was sitting on the end table beside my chair. It had been waiting there all morning. "Then you should probably see this first," I said, my voice even. I slid the folder across the coffee table. It stopped right in front of my father. He looked at it, then at me, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He hesitated. Danielle, ever impatient, snatched it up. Her perfectly manicured fingers opened the clasp. She pulled out the 3 pages inside. Her brow was furrowed in concentration as she began to read. The room was utterly silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own steady breathing. I watched Danielle's face. It was like watching a statue slowly crack. The confident smirk she always wore began to fade. Her lips parted slightly. Her eyes, which had been sharp and calculating, now looked wide and confused. She read the first page, then quickly flipped to the second, then the third. "What is it?" my mother asked, her voice a nervous whisper. Danielle didn't answer. She just kept staring at the paper, her face growing paler. She looked up at me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. This says the estate belongs to a foundation," she finally gasped, the words coming out choked. "Correct," I said simply. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The words on the paper were screaming for me. The Lane Foundation, named after Grandpa's company. My father grabbed the papers from Danielle's trembling hands. His eyes scanned the lines, his face turning from confusion to a deep, mottled red. I could see the moment he understood. The moment the legal, notarized, irreversible truth of it all crashed down on him. "What the hell is this, Aurora?" he snarled, the syrupy charm completely gone, replaced by raw, ugly anger. He waved the papers in his hand. "The Lane Foundation for Marine Conservation? Scholarships? What is this joke?" "It's no joke," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "It's Grandma and Grandpa's legacy. Protected." The word protected hung in the air. An accusation. Protected from what? From whom? The answer was sitting right there on my couch. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of rage and loss. The loss of money. The loss of the future she had so carefully planned for herself. "You mean, you gave it away?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You gave away our inheritance?" I looked at her, at the woman who had seen me as a tool, who had dismissed my grief, who had plotted to sell my grandparents' memory to the highest bidder. And I felt nothing but a cold, clear certainty. I took a breath and delivered the line I had held inside me for 2 long years. The truth that had fueled every late night of studying, every moment of quiet defiance. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through her manufactured sorrow. "I saved it from you." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of their world breaking, the sound of their greed hitting a wall of solid, unmovable truth. They had come here for a signature. They had walked away with a revelation. They thought I was a pawn in their game. They had just discovered I was the one who had changed all the rules. The quiet revenge was complete. The folder on the table had done its work, and the real storm was just about to begin. The silence in the room finally shattered. It was my father who broke it, his voice rising to a roar that seemed too large for my small apartment. "You had no right!" he shouted, slamming his fist on the coffee table. My coffee mug jumped, sloshing brown liquid onto the wood. He was on his feet now, his face contorted with a fury I had never seen before, not directed at me. "Actually, I did," I said calmly. My lack of reaction seemed to fuel his anger even more. I remained seated, a pillar of stillness in the chaos he was creating. Grandpa made a change to his will a few months before he passed. A codicil. He named me the sole executor of the estate. Their faces went blank. "A codicil? You're lying!" Danielle hissed, finding her voice. "We would have known. The lawyers would have told us." "They did tell you," I corrected her gently. "It was in the initial document packet. A single page right at the back. You probably thought it was just another standard form. You were so focused on the total value of the assets that you didn't bother to read the fine print." I remembered the moment I saw it. I had been going through my grandparents' files, organizing things after the funeral, and I found his copy. A handwritten note was clipped to it. "For Aurora. She'll know what to do." My grandfather had seen them. He had known what his own children were capable of, and he had trusted me, not them, to protect what he and Grandma had built. He had given me the key, and my parents, in their greed and carelessness, had handed it to me without a second thought. "As executor," I continued, my voice taking on the steady, measured tone of a lawyer presenting a case, "I was given the legal authority to manage the final distribution of the assets. The will stated the estate was to be divided among the heirs, but it gave the executor discretion on the method of that distribution to best honor the spirit of their legacy. So I honored it. I created a foundation that will do good in their name, forever. Something that selling it for a quick profit never would have." Mom finally broke down. She started to sob, but it was a harsh, ugly sound. It wasn't the sound of a grieving daughter. It was the wail of a child who had just had their favorite toy taken away. "How could you do this to us, Aurora?" she cried, her words muffled by her hands. "To your own family? After everything we've done for you? We paid for your education. We gave you everything." The old lie, the one that had stung so deeply that night on the stairs. This time it didn't hurt. It just felt pathetic. "No, you didn't," I said, my voice cutting through her sobs, sharp and clear. You never gave me a dime for my education. Grandma and Grandpa paid for every single cent of it. They set up a fund for me the day I was born. You just took credit for it. The color drained from her face. Dad and Danielle just stared, speechless. It was a truth they had conveniently forgotten, a fact they had buried so deep they had started to believe their own fiction. The exposure of that lie seemed to hurt them more than the loss of the money. It stripped them of their last shred of moral authority, their last weapon to try and guilt me with. Danielle recovered first. Her shock morphed into a venomous personal attack. She stood up, her eyes blazing with a cold fire. This isn't about their legacy, she sneered. This is about you. You were always the quiet one, the resentful one, lurking in the background. You were jealous of me, jealous of Mom and Dad. This is just your pathetic, petty revenge because you never felt important enough. I looked at my sister, the golden child, the one who had always gotten the attention, the praise, the love, and I felt a flicker of pity for her. She couldn't comprehend doing something for a reason other than selfishness or spite, because those were the only emotions that drove her. Think whatever you need to think, Danielle, I said, my voice soft again. It doesn't change the reality. The foundation is legal. It's irrevocable. There is nothing you can do. That was it. The final nail. The word irrevocable, for Danielle, the pragmatist, the negotiator, that was the end of the road. There was no deal to be made, no angle to be worked. They had lost. The insult started then, a desperate, last-ditch effort to wound me. They called me ungrateful, selfish, cruel. They said I had destroyed the family. I stood up, finally meeting them at eye level. The four of us stood in the wreckage of what they had always pretended our family was. You talk about inheritance as if it's just money in a bank account, I said, my voice low but carrying the weight of 2 years of pain and resolve. Grandma and Grandpa's inheritance was the summers on the coast. It was the stories Grandpa told. It was the way Grandma's garden bloomed every spring. It was the value of protecting things, not selling them. You didn't want their inheritance. You just wanted their money. I paused, looking each of them in the eye. They called me ungrateful, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I called it justice. There was nothing left to say. The truth had hit them like a wave, washing away all their plans, all their lies, all their power over me. My father grabbed his coat, his face a mask of thunder. Mom, still crying, let him pull her toward the door. Danielle gave me one last look of pure hatred before turning on her heel and following them. They stormed out of my apartment, slamming the door behind them. The silence that descended was profound. It was a true peaceful quiet, not the heavy, waiting quiet from before. The storm had passed. I was left standing in the calm. On the counter, the basket of lemon cookies sat untouched, a sad, sweet-smelling monument to their failed manipulation. I walked over, picked up the whole basket, and dropped it into the trash. After they left, my apartment felt too small, the city air too thick. I needed to breathe. I needed the ocean. I grabbed my keys, walked out of my apartment without a backward glance, and started the long drive to the coast. The further I drove from the city, the lighter I felt. The gray concrete and sharp angles of the buildings gave way to the towering green pines and rolling hills of the Oregon countryside. The sky opened up, vast and silver with the promise of rain. With every mile, I felt like I was shedding a layer of skin, leaving behind the anger, the confrontation, and the weight of my family's greed. I was driving toward myself. When I finally turned onto the winding coastal highway, the familiar scent of salt and damp earth filled my car. The roar of the Pacific was a low, constant hum, a sound that had been the soundtrack to the happiest moments of my life. It was the sound of coming home. I pulled into the gravel driveway of the estate. The old stone house stood exactly as it always had, sturdy and steadfast against the wind. It didn't look like a $3 million asset. It looked like a place where people had lived and loved for generations. A small, tastefully carved wooden sign stood near the entrance, simple and clear, the Lane Foundation for Marine Conservation. Seeing it there, real and solid, sent a wave of profound peace through me. I walked inside, and the house welcomed me. Everything smelled of cedar and salt, and the faint, lingering scent of my grandmother's wood polish. It was clean and cared for, but not sterile. It felt lived in, filled with a new kind of purpose. The old furniture was still there, the worn armchair where Grandpa used to read, the faded floral sofa. But now, the large dining table was covered with marine charts and research papers from the university partnership. The bookshelves were filled with textbooks on conservation alongside Grandma's old novels. I walked through the house and out the back door toward the garden. It was blooming again, a riot of color even under the gray sky. A local gardening club, funded by a small grant from the foundation, had taken it on as a project, cultivating the native plants my grandmother had so lovingly planted. It was more beautiful than I had seen it in years. I stood on the cliff's edge, looking out at the churning gray-green sea. The tide was high, and the waves crashed against the rocks below, sending plumes of white spray into the air. The wind whipped my hair around my face, and for the first time since my grandparents had passed, I felt a sense of pure, unburdened joy. I had done it. I had kept my promise. Back inside, I sat at Grandpa's old desk in the study overlooking the ocean. A small stack of mail was waiting for me. Bills for the foundation, a newsletter from a local conservation group, and a single handwritten envelope. I opened it. The letter was from a young woman, the first recipient of the Lane Foundation scholarship. She was a freshman at Oregon State, studying marine biology. Her letter was simple, heartfelt, and powerful. "Dear Ms. Lane," she wrote, "I don't know how to thank you for this opportunity. I am the first person in my family to go to college. I grew up just down the coast from here, and I've spent my whole life exploring the tide pools and watching the fishing boats. The ocean is in my blood, just like it was for your grandfather. Because of your family's foundation, I get to turn that love into a career. I get to study the thing I care about most in the world. I visited the estate last week just to see it. It's a beautiful place. I promise I will work hard. I'll make you and your grandparents proud. I'll make sure the ocean you loved stays protected for everyone. Sincerely, Sarah Jenkins." I held the letter in my hands, my vision blurring with tears. But these were not tears of anger or sadness. They were tears of gratitude. This was the validation. This was the legacy. It wasn't in a bank account. It was in the future of a young woman like Sarah. It was in the protected coastline, in the research being funded, in the garden blooming for the community to enjoy. I stood by the window, holding that letter, and looked out at the vast, wild sea. The rain had started to fall, gentle and cleansing. I felt my grandparents there with me, not as ghosts, but as a quiet, steady presence. A feeling of love and approval that I had never truly gotten from my own parents. I hadn't acted out of vengeance. I had acted out of love. I hadn't destroyed a family. I had preserved a legacy. My family had made their choices, chasing a fortune that was never theirs to begin with. I had made mine. I had chosen to build something that would last, something good. And in the quiet peace of that house by the sea, I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I had chosen right. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes protecting what you love isn't a loud, angry battle. It's quiet. It's calculated, and it's final. I didn't ruin my family. They ruined themselves chasing money that was never meant to be theirs in the first place. Their own greed was their downfall. I just built something stronger in its place. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you're too quiet to fight back, subscribe, like, and tell me where you're watching from. Because quiet people don't stay silent forever. Sometimes, they just wait until the ink is dry.